Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hogg, thank you for showing the courage to come here today. Do you think we've done enough, Congress?
I mean, I think if you would have done enough, we wouldn't have to be having this conversation today, right? Just to be frank with you. I think if we did enough, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have lost my friends. Lots of people back in my community in Florida would not have lost their children or their loved ones. I think there's much more that needs to be done. I appreciate, as I stated in my testimony, you allowing me to be here today because that's the first step. But I think there's a myriad of things that we need to work on, like I said. And I believe part of school safety is implementing proactive measures that include things like gun violence prevention. And that's something that so often is not wanted to be something that's talked about. But I think we need to remember, I think one of the greatest things you all can do as congressmen and women is continue to have young people who are being affected by this be at the forefront of these conversations.
I want to get a sense of what you and your friends who went through this horrific crisis think about us in Washington, D.C. If Parkland happened tomorrow, again.
It might at a different school.
It might.
Yeah.
If Sandy Hook happened again tomorrow somewhere else, do you think we would act?
With in regards to school safety?
And gun control?
I hope one day you will. Unfortunately, if that takes until people my age are in your positions who have grown up learning school safety procedures and losing loved ones to gun violence, if you guys don't act, eventually I know things will happen because people my age who have been continuously traumatized by instances of gun violence, whether that be within regards to in-school or out-of-school gun violence, and especially communities of color, we're gonna be the legislators sitting in your seats. We're gonna be the ones who have lived through this, who will have to make these changes. So if trying to imagine a world where school shootings aren't a thing that happened to myself is like trying to describe a color to a blind man. I mean, this has been my normal my whole life. It's unfortunate, but it has. I mean, I think if Sandy Hook or Stoneman Douglas happened tomorrow, I'm not sure if many of congressmen and congresswomen today would do anything unless it was their own child or their own loved one who was taken to gun violence.
Ms. Hogg, I don't think you and your friends at this point have any reason to trust us. I think I share your sentiments. I don't know how much more blood has to be spilled in this country. I don't know how many more children have to be afraid to go to school. I don't know how many more parents have to hug their kids before they go to school, fearing that they're not going to come home before we do something. This is as sad as it gets. And you're right, it may have to come to you and your friends replacing us up here before we actually act. Ms. Hogg, as you think about your teachers that you've had, do you think that they are capable during another Parkland of discharging a weapon in your defense?
I think it's not their responsibility. I come from a family of teachers, and I think when they went to college, when they went to school to become an educator, they weren't thinking that part of their job was gonna have to be a security officer. So like I stated in my testimony once before, we had an armed officer at my school. And when it came to that moment of fight or flight, he went away. So the idea that teachers having guns would solve this issue is the same idea as giving another person a gun to solve gun violence is the issue, if you know what I'm saying. And when we hear those things like 2 guns will protect the majority of people from one bad guy with a gun, that's kind of just sounding like we're trying to turn every single individual, or in this case, every single teacher, into an armed vigilante. And that's something that no teacher should have to be. And also, I just cannot imagine if teachers were armed, the amount of incidences that would take place, that would be them killing a student who didn't happen to be the perpetrator of the violence. And I think there would just be more violence coming out of that if teachers were armed. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Hogg, for your testimony, and thank you for your leadership. I wish there were more folks around here like you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania.